There's something uniquely terrifying about the unknown, things that defy logic and challenge what we believe to be real. While some might dismiss strange lights in the sky or unexplainable encounters as pure imagination, countless individuals have experienced events that they can't rationalize, leaving them haunted and forever questioning. The stories you're about to hear aren't just tales of the bizarre, they're first-hand accounts of ordinary people who found themselves face-to-face with something extraordinary. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, one thing is certain: the unknown is closer than we think. Turn down the lights, and let's begin. A silent encounter. I used to live in a remote rural area, far from city lights and surrounded by dense woods. Nights out there had an eerie charm, a mix of peace and unsettling silence. One particular evening in late summer, the kind where the air felt heavy and the cricket's song was the only soundtrack, I experienced something I'll never forget. It started with an innocent idea. I wanted to capture the stars. With my old DSLR camera in hand, I headed to the clearing near my property. It was the perfect spot, no light pollution, just the vast expanse of the sky. Around 11 p.m., I set up my tripod and aimed my lens upward, adjusting the settings for long exposures. The first few shots were breathtaking. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a cosmic river, and I couldn't stop marveling at the beauty above. About 30 minutes in, something odd happened. The crickets stopped chirping. If you've ever spent time in nature, you'd know how unnerving it feels when the natural soundtrack cuts off abruptly. It was as though someone hit a mute button on the world. I stood there, frozen, trying to rationalize the silence. Then, I saw it, a light. At first, I thought it might be a shooting star. But it wasn't. It hovered in the distance, just above the treetops, emitting a faint bluish glow. The way it moved defied logic. It zigzagged, paused, then darted again. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Maybe it was a drone? But who would be flying a drone out here at this hour? I kept watching, transfixed. The light started to grow brighter, and soon, I realized it was coming closer. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to move. The glow illuminated the clearing, bathing everything in an unnatural hue. Suddenly, there was a low humming sound, subtle at first but growing louder, resonating in my chest. The air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. And then, I saw it, a shape descending from the light. It wasn't a craft like you see in movies, no clear saucers or metallic edges. Instead, it was organic, almost fluid in form, shifting as though it wasn't entirely solid. And beneath it, there were figures. Humanoid, but not human. They were tall, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed too large for their thin bodies. Their skin glistened under the blue light, almost translucent. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind raced with fear and questions. Were they aware of me? What did they want? I didn't have to wonder long. One of the beings turned its head sharply in my direction, and even though we were a good distance apart, I felt it, a presence in my mind, like someone was sifting through my thoughts. Panic took over. I grabbed my camera, which was still on the tripod, and ran. I didn't look back, not even when I heard a strange clicking sound behind me, almost like a language I couldn't understand. I sprinted through the woods, branches scratching my arms and face, until I reached the safety of my house. I locked the doors and windows and sat in the living room, my heart pounding. The camera was still in my hands. I opened the gallery and scrolled through the photos, desperate to see if I'd captured anything. At first, everything looked normal, just stars in the night sky. But then, there it was, a faint blue light in the corner of one frame, then a series of blurry streaks in the next. And finally, a clear shot of one of the beings, its large, dark eyes staring directly at the lens. I didn't sleep that night. For weeks, I debated what to do with the photos. I thought about sharing them online, but fear held me back. What if they came back? What if sharing their existence drew them to me again? To this day, I haven't gone back to that clearing. The photos are stored on an old SD card, hidden away in a drawer. Sometimes, I think about destroying them, but a part of me feels like they're my only proof that it wasn't all a nightmare. And every now and then, on those quiet, starry nights, I catch myself looking up, wondering if they're still watching. Lights on the road. It was a regular Friday night, and I was driving back home after visiting my sister in a nearby town. The road stretched endlessly through desolate fields, bordered by swaying trees. There were no other cars, just the glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. It was past midnight when I noticed something strange. In the distance, a bluish light flickered irregularly on the horizon. At first, I thought it was a tower or maybe some kind of far-off beacon, but the way it moved was unsettling. The light wasn't stationary. It darted and hovered, its movements too erratic to be natural. My first instinct was to slow down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But as I did, the light seemed to move closer. Within minutes, it was near enough to illuminate the fields around me. That's when I realized it wasn't just a light. It was an object, large and silent, hovering only a few meters above the ground. Its shape was undefined, almost triangular but with rounded edges, and its metallic surface shimmered faintly under the stars. The only sound was a deep, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate inside my chest. Panic set in, and I pressed the accelerator. The engine roared as I sped down the road, but the object stayed with me. Its light grew brighter, almost blinding, making it hard to focus on the road. Glancing into my rearview mirror, I saw something even more horrifying: shadows. Tall, thin figures moving quickly, as though they were chasing me. The road felt endless, and my only hope was to reach a gas station a few miles ahead. My thoughts raced between praying and trying to rationalize what was happening. Then, something inexplicable occurred. The car died. The headlights went out, the engine stalled, and silence enveloped me. I was stranded in the middle of the road, surrounded by darkness, with the light hovering directly above. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as though the very atmosphere was pressing down on me. That's when I saw them. 3 figures, tall and slender, emerged from the edge of the road. Their movements were smooth, almost gliding. They had large, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me. One of them raised an arm, and I felt an overwhelming pressure in my head, like my thoughts were being scrambled. My vision blurred, and it felt as though I was on the verge of passing out. Just before losing consciousness, I heard a voice, or perhaps it was a thought, invade my mind. It said, "Do not fear. This is not for you." When I came to, I was still in the car. The engine was running as if nothing had happened. The light was gone, and so were the figures. Shaken and confused, I drove straight home without stopping. For days, I tried to make sense of it. There were no marks on the car, no physical evidence of what I'd seen, but I felt different. Nightmares plagued me, vivid and recurring, always centered around those dark eyes and the deep hum. To this day, I avoid that stretch of road at night. I don't know what I encountered, but I'm certain it wasn't human. And the worst part? I feel like, somehow, they left something behind, a part of them that's still with me, waiting to reveal itself. The field encounter. Growing up in a small, rural town meant that excitement often came from simple things, like late-night drives or camping out in open fields with friends. One summer night, a few years back, I had an experience that completely shattered my sense of safety in those quiet, open spaces. My friend Nate and I decided to camp out in a large field behind his family's property. It was the perfect spot, isolated, quiet, and far from any light pollution. Armed with a tent, some snacks, and a Bluetooth speaker, we were ready for a night of stargazing and talking about anything and everything. It was around 1 a.m. when things started to get strange. We were lying outside the tent, looking up at the stars, when Nate nudged me and pointed to the sky. "You see that?" he asked. At first, I didn't. Then, I noticed a faint light, moving across the sky. It wasn't a plane, there were no blinking lights or a steady trajectory. It zigzagged, then stopped abruptly, hovering in place before moving again. We laughed nervously, trying to play it off as a drone or maybe a satellite. But the light got closer. Within minutes, it was no longer a distant speck but a glowing orb silently floating above the field. It was about the size of a car, with a pulsating, bluish glow that lit up the area around it. The air felt charged, like static electricity. "Let's go inside," Nate whispered, but neither of us moved. It was as if we were rooted to the spot, unable to look away. Suddenly, a second light appeared, smaller but moving rapidly around the first. It darted in impossibly quick movements, almost playful. The two lights seemed to interact, circling and weaving around each other. Then, we heard it, a low, mechanical hum, deep and vibrating. The sound wasn't loud, but it resonated in our chests, like it was inside us. That's when the fear truly set in. We scrambled to our feet, but as we did, the larger light descended. It was close now, no more than 20 feet above the ground. For the first time, we could make out details, a smooth, metallic surface that seemed to ripple like liquid and faint patterns or symbols etched into its body. Nate grabbed my arm. "Run," he said, his voice trembling. We sprinted toward the house, the light following us. As we ran, the smaller light zipped past us, so close I could feel the heat radiating from it. It stopped abruptly ahead of us, blocking our path. The hum grew louder, almost deafening. Nate screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the sound. I looked back and saw them, figures emerging from beneath the larger light. They were tall, impossibly thin, with elongated arms and heads that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. One of them raised its arm, and in that instant, I felt a wave of pressure, like my entire body was being pushed down. My vision blurred, and my knees buckled. The last thing I remember before blacking out was Nate's terrified face, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. I woke up hours later, lying in the middle of the field. The sun was rising, and Nate was nowhere to be found. I stumbled back to the house, calling his name, but he wasn't there. His parents called the police, and a search team was assembled. They found him later that day, miles away, wandering aimlessly in the woods. He didn't remember anything after the light blocked our path. To this day, neither of us can explain what happened. We stopped talking about it after a while, but sometimes I'll catch Nate staring into the distance, lost in thought. I know he remembers more than he's willing to admit. And on clear nights, when the stars are bright, I can't help but feel like they're still out there, watching. The farm incident. This story happened when I was 16 years old. My family owned a farm in an isolated region, surrounded by mountains and endless pastures. It was a peaceful place, where the nights were so dark you could see the entire Milky Way stretching across the sky. But one night, that serenity was shattered by something I still struggle to explain. It was late autumn, and my parents had gone to the nearest town for supplies, leaving me alone to look after the animals. I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed the solitude. After finishing my chores, I sat on the porch with a book, letting the cool night air wrap around me. Around 10 p.m., I noticed a faint light in the distance. It was coming from the far edge of the pasture, near the tree line. At first, I thought it was the headlights of a car, though that didn't make sense. There were no roads out there. Curious, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check it out. As I approached the pasture, the light grew brighter. It wasn't a steady glow. It flickered and pulsed, almost like it was alive. When I reached the fence, I stopped dead in my tracks. Hovering about 10 feet above the ground was a massive object, roughly the size of a small barn. Its surface was smooth and metallic, reflecting the faint moonlight, but it also emitted its own bluish glow. It didn't make any sound except for a low hum, which I could feel vibrating through my chest. I stood there, frozen, my flashlight still in hand but completely useless against the intensity of that light. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot down from the object, illuminating a patch of grass just a few meters away from me. Inside the beam, the air seemed to shimmer, almost like heat rising off asphalt. That's when I saw them. 3 figures materialized within the light. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with elongated limbs and heads. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes, large, dark, and unblinking, seemed to pierce right through me. They didn't walk, they glided, moving toward the fence with an eerie grace. I wanted to run, but my body refused to cooperate. It was as if some invisible force was holding me in place. One of the figures stopped and tilted its head, studying me. I swear I felt something, an invasive presence in my mind, like it was sifting through my thoughts and memories. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the beam of light retracted. The figures vanished, and the object shot upward into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving nothing behind but silence and a faint smell of ozone. I stumbled back to the house, locking every door and window. My parents returned an hour later and found me sitting in the kitchen, shaking and unable to speak. When I finally told them what happened, they exchanged worried glances but didn't say much. The next morning, I went back to the pasture. The grass where the beam had landed was scorched, blackened in a perfect circle. My parents wouldn't let me tell anyone about it, insisting that no one would believe me. To this day, I still see that light in my dreams. Sometimes, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that they're back, watching from the edge of the pasture, waiting for the right moment to return. As we come to the end of these chilling stories, one thing becomes clear: the unknown doesn't ask for permission to enter our lives, it simply does. Whether it's a strange light in the sky, an unexplainable figure in the dark, or a lingering feeling that you were watched, these encounters remind us how small we truly are in the grand scheme of things. For some, the fear lies in the possibility that these events might one day happen to them. For others, the real terror is knowing that they already have. Until next time, stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes, it's better not to look too closely into the dark.